She was not supposed to go out that night. There was nothing waiting for her in the rain except a lost boy, and a long walk and consequences she could not have predicted. She went anyway. This is what happened next. Her name is Nora Ellsworth, and this is her story. But to understand it properly, you must first understand what came before the rain. To understand what Nora Ellsworth did that night and why it matters, you must first understand what the 4 years before it had cost her. Nora's mother died when Nora was 9. It was not a dramatic death, no long farewell, no gradual dimming that gave the living time to prepare. One morning her mother was there, warm and smelling of lavender, and 3 days later she was not, and the shape of the world became something Nora did not recognize and spent years quietly learning to inhabit. Her father, George Ellsworth, was a good man in the truest and least theatrical sense of the word. He was a solicitor of modest success in the market town of Casterfield in Lincolnshire, and he loved his daughter with the steady, undemonstrative devotion of a man who expresses love through presence rather than declaration. For 3 years after her mother's death, it was just the two of them, and those 3 years were, Nora would think later, the last time she understood what the word home meant without any qualification attached to it. Then her father remarried. Mrs. Dorothea Price was a widow, sharp-minded, and possessed of opinions about the world that she delivered with the unwavering conviction of a woman who had decided her perspective was the only one worth having in any room she occupied. She was not stupid. Stupidity would have been simpler to manage. She was calculating, and she assessed Nora within the first fortnight of her arrival with the particular attention of a woman identifying an obstacle, and she proceeded accordingly. The cruelties were small at first, small enough to point at nothing and imply everything. A remark about Nora's hair at breakfast, a chore assigned at the precise hour of a friend's invitation, an observation delivered with the smooth performance of concern that Nora's prospects were not what they might be, given her plainness, her lack of fortune, her unfortunate quietness which men found dull. She ought not to set her expectations too high. Nora reported these things to her father, twice. The first time he spoke to Dorothea. Dorothea wept with the practiced fluency of a woman who had learned that tears were more effective than arguments and said she had only meant to help, and the evening became a misery that left her father pale and shaken, and Dorothea triumphant behind, her handkerchief. The second time, Nora watched her father's hands on the dinner table afterward, the slight tremor in them that had not been there before, the way he pressed at his chest with the absent gesture of a man not quite comfortable in his own body. She watched this and she understood, with the particular clarity of a person who loves someone more than they love their own comfort, what the arithmetic of the situation required. She did not report anything again. She became, to all outward appearances, exactly what Dorothea wanted: compliant, useful, present when required, and invisible when preferred. She rose early and managed the household, and absorbed the daily inventory of small cruelties with a composure that Dorothea mistook for defeat and was, in fact, something considerably more deliberate than that. She did not attend the midsummer ball, because Dorothea assigned the mending at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and mending could not be left. She did not walk to the lending library on Tuesday mornings because Dorothea had noticed that Mr. Fairfax's son passed the house on Tuesdays and did not wish Nora to be visible at the window. She did not play cards at the Hartley house on Thursdays because there was always, on Thursdays, something requiring her first, and the requiring always lasted past the point of going. Nora watched her life become smaller by careful, deliberate degrees, and she said nothing, because on the other side of saying something was her father's hands, and the tremor that was getting worse, and the chest he pressed at when he thought no one was watching. He died in February, on a Thursday, at 2:30 in the afternoon. Nora was with him. Dorothea was in the parlor receiving a call. Nora held his hand and told him the garden was coming along well, which was a comfortable lie because it was February and nothing was doing anything, but he had always loved the garden, and she wanted the last things he heard to be kind. After the funeral, Dorothea stopped managing the architecture of small cruelties. The architecture had implied effort, and effort implied that Nora's response mattered. What replaced it was simpler and colder. The casual indifference of a woman who has decided the person in front of her is not quite real enough to require consideration. She told Nora she would die a spinster, told her no man of sense would attach himself to a woman with no fortune, no connections, and the unfortunate quality of excessive quietness. Told her to be grateful for the roof and to stop imagining that her life contained possibilities it did not contain. Nora listened. She filed it away with everything else she had filed over 4 years, and she kept managing the household, and she said nothing. But she had not, in all those years of careful silence, stopped noticing. She noticed everything. It was perhaps the one freedom Dorothea had not thought to take. The night everything changed was a Wednesday in October, and the rain had the committed Lincolnshire quality of weather that considers itself a personal matter. Nora was in the kitchen when she heard the knock. She heard Dorothea's footsteps in the hall first. Dorothea moved with the decisive tread of a woman who considers every space she crosses to be fundamentally hers, and so Nora came to the kitchen doorway quietly and watched. The boy on the step was perhaps 8 years old, soaked entirely through. His coat was muddied and dark with water, but cut from wool of a quality that had no business on a child standing alone in a village lane at dusk. This Nora registered and filed in the same breath. His hair was plastered flat. His eyes were large and steady, and doing the work of a child who had decided some time ago that he would not cry about whatever had brought him here, and was concentrating on this decision with considerable effort. He looked at Dorothea with the careful courtesy of a child who had been raised to apply it regardless of circumstances. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice clear despite the rain. "I am afraid I have lost my way. Might I come in, please, and have something to eat? I would be most grateful." Dorothea looked at him. Nora watched her look at him. Watched the calculation, swift, practiced, entirely visible to anyone paying attention, cross her face. A wet child, muddy floors, inconvenience. No return. "There is nothing here for you," Dorothea said, and she closed the door. She threw the bolt. She walked back down the hall with the decisive tread of a woman who has dispatched a minor nuisance efficiently and considers the matter settled, and she did not look at Nora in the kitchen doorway, and Nora did not look at her. Nora looked at the door. She stood there for 5 seconds. She thought about Dorothea's face at breakfast. She thought about 4 years of Thursdays. She thought about her father's hands, and whether he would recognize the person she had become in trying to protect him, and whether that person was someone he would have wanted her to be. Then she went to the kitchen board, took the half loaf remaining from the morning, wrapped it in cloth, lifted her cloak from the hook, and went out the back. She did not think about what Dorothea would say when she returned. She was tired of thinking about what Dorothea would say. She found him at the end of the lane. He was walking back into the rain with the upright, deliberate posture of a child who has been turned away and will not let it show in his gait. He did not look back. He had too much dignity for that, and the dignity itself, in a soaked 8-year-old walking alone into October dark, made something in Nora's chest go very still and very certain. "Wait," she said. He stopped. He turned. He looked at her with the cautious assessment of a child who has already had one door closed on him tonight, and is not yet certain whether this represents an improvement. She held out the bread. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said, with the precision of someone for whom courtesy was not performance, but simply the natural texture of how he moved through the world. He took the bread and he ate it, not wolfing, not pretending he wasn't hungry, finding the careful middle path between the two that suggested someone had taught him about dignity at table, and he had taken the lesson to heart, even in a lane in the rain. "Where are you trying to go?" Nora asked. He told her. "The Wrenmore estate," he said, "through the Thornwood, and then north along the Ridge Road." He had come through the Thornwood that afternoon, and the way back had seemed straightforward. Nora looked at him. "The Thornwood in October after dark is 4 miles from here, and not a place for walking alone," she said. "What is your name?" He considered this, the small, visible pause of someone deciding how much to give. "Albert," he said. "Just Albert, if you please." "Just Albert," she said. "I am Nora. Come with me." She took him back through the garden gate and in through the kitchen, and she settled him by the banked stove and built the fire properly, and she made tea and thick bread with butter and set it before him, and she did not ask questions while he ate because she understood instinctively that eating was not a time for questions. When he was done, he folded his hands on the table with the unconscious precision of a child for whom correct posture had been established very early, and he looked at her with the direct, considering attention of someone conducting a serious assessment. "You live here," he said, with the woman who closed the door. "Yes," Nora said. She was unkind. "Yes," Nora said. "But you are not," he said. Not flattery. An observation stated with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who has examined the evidence and reached his conclusion. Something about the way he said it, simply, without drama, as though he were reporting a point of navigation, moved through Nora's chest in a way she was not entirely prepared for. Tell me how you came to be in the Thornwood, she said, and he told her. He lived, he said, in a very large house, with very tall gates, and a great many people employed specifically to ensure that nothing happened to him. This was their primary occupation. As a result, a considerable number of things he would have liked to happen had not happened, because the people ensuring his safety had interpreted their role rather broadly. I wanted to see the wood, he said. I have seen it from the upper windows for 3 years. I have read about the ecology of deciduous woodland in October and wish to observe it, rather than study it through glass. He paused with the precise dignity of a child defending a methodology he stands behind. I found a section of the fence that was not being watched, and I went. And then you got lost, Nora said. The navigational principles I applied were sound, he said. The terrain was more variable than the maps suggested. Nora pressed her lips together against the thing that wanted to be a smile. I see. I am not, he added, in the habit of getting lost. Of course not, she said. Come. There is a warm room off the kitchen. You will sleep, and before the house wakes, I will take you home. He looked at her with the direct, earnest attention she was already beginning to recognize as simply how he inhabited the world. You are very kind, he said, as though documenting something rare. I have bread and a warm room, she said. It is not remarkable. It is, he said. From where I am standing, it rather is. She put her mother's quilt over him, and she was quiet, and he was asleep within minutes in the total, boneless way of a child who has been in motion for a long time and has finally been given permission to stop. She sat in the kitchen after and looked at the fire. She thought about the Wrenmore estate, about whose estate it was, about who lived there with their heir behind tall gates, and a great many people employed to ensure nothing happened to him. She did not let herself think too long about what it meant. Tonight the child was warm and safe. That was sufficient. She would think about everything else in the morning. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. Before first light she rose. He was immediately, completely awake when she came for him, not the groggy surfacing of a child dragged from sleep, the clean, instant alertness of someone who had learned to come up fast. He dressed and folded her mother's quilt with the neat precision that she was coming to. Understand was simply how he did things, and he looked at her with the ready attention of a student waiting for what comes next. They left through the garden gate before the world was watching. The walk was 4 miles in the particular silence of very early morning, when the world has not yet decided to be itself, and the air carries the cold, clean quality of something unused. They walked the ridge road as the Thornwood thinned to fields, and the fields opened to the long approach of Wrenmore land, and Albert talked. He talked the way very intelligent, lonely children talk when given the rare gift of an adult who listens without agenda, in full sentences, with real ideas, entirely without the self-consciousness of a child performing for approval. He talked about the Thornwood and what he had observed there, what had matched his reading and what had surprised it. He talked about his father's library, the books he had read and those he intended to, his assessment of several that were generally considered important, and which he had concluded, on examination, were overrated. He was the most singular 8-year-old Nora had ever encountered. Not in the performing way of a child who has been told he is exceptional and has begun to believe the telling. In the way of a person with an interior life of great richness who had been, for lack of company, living inside it entirely alone. You are very easy to talk to, he said, somewhere in the 2nd mile, with the same matter-of-fact observation he applied to everything. You are very easy to listen to, she said. He considered this. My tutor listens, he said. But in the manner of a man doing his job, you listen as a person who is interested. I am interested, she said simply. He nodded, satisfied, as though this confirmed a hypothesis he had been running. In the 3rd mile, the conversation quieted into the easy silence of 2 people who have found each other's company sufficient without requiring it to be filled. It was in this silence that Albert put his hand in his coat pocket and brought out a small object, turning it over in his fingers as he walked. A brass button, military pattern, old and worn smooth at the edges from handling. My father's, Albert said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the road ahead with the particular focus of a child saying a true thing carefully. From his regiment, before he sold his commission. A pause. He died in March. Nora did not say he was in a better place. She did not say anything for a moment. She walked beside him and let the silence be what it was, which was not empty. People tell me that, Albert said, in the tone of a child reporting information he has received, assessed, and found wanting. That he is in a better place. I believe they say it because they are uncomfortable with not knowing what else to say. I think you are probably right, Nora said. I would rather they said nothing, he said. Or said simply, I am sorry. He was important and now he is gone, and that is a true loss. That would be honest. Nora looked at the road ahead. She thought about her father's hands on the dinner table, about February and the garden lie and the things she had wanted to say in that room that she had kept instead, because keeping them was the last kindness available to her. Your father died in March, she said. He was important. His absence is a true loss. I am sorry. Albert looked at her, the full, clear, weighing attention. Then he put the button back in his pocket. Thank you, he said, and meant it entirely, in the way that only a child who has been given very little of the real thing can mean a simple thank you. They walked the rest of the way in the easy quiet of people who understand each other without needing to demonstrate it. Nora was so occupied with the particular texture of that quiet, the warmth of it, the way it felt like something she had been missing without knowing its name, that she did not fully process, until they came over the final ridge and the grounds of Renmore opened in the early light before them. How large the house was. She stopped walking. The gates were exactly as he had described them. The grounds were extensive, and the figures visible even at this hour, moving with the focused urgency of a household that had been awake all night, had the specific energy of people engaged in a search. Albert, she said carefully. Her voice was steady. Everything else was not. What is your full name? He looked up at her with the expression of a child who has, in honesty, been expecting this question since approximately the 2nd mile. Albert Vane, he said. Lord Albert Vane. My father was the previous Duke of Renmore. My uncle is the current one. He paused. I did tell you it was the Renmore estate. You did, she said. You did tell me that. She stood on the ridge and looked at the estate below and thought, with the cold clarity of someone doing very rapid arithmetic, about a woman of no standing found at dawn on ducal grounds in the company of a missing heir, and about the gap between what a child says happened and what adults with authority choose to believe, and about the fact that she had no one, not a single person, who would come today if she sent word. Nora, Albert. Yes, she said. You saved me, he said. I will tell them so. He said it the way he said everything, not as reassurance, but as statement of established fact. I know you will, she said. She believed him. And she was still afraid. They came down from the ridge together. The men reached them at the edge of the home wood. 4 of them in the Duke's livery, with the contained urgency of people who have been searching through the night, and have located what they were searching for, and are now completing the task with the efficiency of relief converting into action. 2 went directly to Albert. The other 2 stopped at Nora. That is her, said the larger man to the other, with the absolute certainty of someone who has already decided. She had the boy. I was returning him, Nora said clearly. He came to my door last night, and I brought him. You will speak when you are asked to speak, the man said, in the tone of a person managing a situation that is already settled in his mind. Albert turned around. She was bringing me home, he said, in the clear, carrying voice of a child who has learned that clarity of speech is the first tool available to him. She found me in the village. She gave me shelter and she walked me back this morning. You will not treat her as a suspect. My lord, the man said, in the measured tone of someone managing a child who does not understand how things work. We will need to. You will not treat her as a suspect, Albert said again. He was 8 years old. He said it with the absolute composure of someone for whom this was not a negotiation. The man looked at him. He looked at Nora. He made the calculation of a man who has a job to complete and a missing heir who is now found and a woman whose story can be verified later through the appropriate channels. And he made it in approximately 4 seconds. Take her to the East Lodge, he said to the other man. Bring the boy to his grace. Albert's face changed. She comes with me, he said, my lord. His grace will want. She comes with me. But the men had been awake all night in the cold, and the relief of finding the boy had already become the business-like momentum of men completing what they had been sent to do, and so Albert was taken one direction and Nora another, and the last thing she saw before the lodge door closed was Albert looking back at her, and what was in his face was not fear for himself. The East Lodge was a small, neat waiting room for tradespeople and estate visitors. Nora sat in the single chair and folded her hands in her lap and breathed in the careful, deliberate way of a person choosing composure over panic because panic was not available to her. She had her word. She had no connections, no family to send for, no name that carried weight in any room that mattered. She had the word of an 8-year-old boy. She held to that. She heard the commotion from across the courtyard before she understood what it was. A child's voice, high and furious and stripped entirely of its usual precision. Then a man's voice attempting authority. Then a sound she could not immediately identify. Then another man's voice, urgent, saying something she could not make out. Then footsteps, rapid, purposeful, crossing the stone of the courtyard toward the lodge. The door opened. The man who filled the doorway was tall, with the dark coloring and the controlled bearing of someone who has spent years learning to occupy rooms without letting them see what he is carrying. He had clearly not slept. His eyes found her immediately and assessed her with the direct, undecorated attention of someone who looks at what is actually in front of him rather than what he has been told to expect. "Miss Ellsworth," he said. "Your Grace," she said. She stood. He looked at her for a moment in the way of a man recalibrating something mid-arrival. Then he said, "My son has bitten my head of grounds." Nora looked at him. "On the leg," the Duke said, quite firmly. He declined to release until I asked personally. He then bit harder when I tried to carry him, to make his position emphatic, and released when I agreed to come here first. "Is the man all right?" Nora asked. "He will recover." Something shifted at the corner of the Duke's expression, not a smile. The shadow of one, restrained. "Albert has explained to me what occurred last night, twice, once before the incident and once after, for what I believe was intended as additional emphasis." He looked at her directly, with the clear steadiness of a man who considers apology to be a simple act rather than a complicated one. "You should not have been brought here, Miss Ellsworth. I am sorry for it. Your men found their employer's heir in the company of a stranger at dawn," Nora said. "The assumption they made was a reasonable one." "It was a wrong one," he said. "I am sorry for it regardless." She looked at him. He said it the way people say things they actually mean, without the smooth-over management of a man containing a situation. Directly, simply, as though the apology were a fact being stated rather than a performance being delivered. "Thank you," she said. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The silence of two people who have arrived at a moment and are each, privately, taking its measure. "Albert's mother died when he was 3, the Duke said. He has a tutor and a housekeeper of great competence, and myself, though I am aware that I have not always been as present as I should have been." He said this with the careful honesty of a man stating something he has only recently allowed himself to see clearly. "What he found in your kitchen last night. He has not stopped talking about it since they brought him in. He said you listened to him." "He is very worth listening to," Nora said. "I know," Cassian Vane said quietly. And in those 2 words was everything a father carries when he knows his child is exceptional and fears he has not done enough with that knowledge. A beat of silence. "I would like to ask you," he said, "to stay. As Albert's governess, a proper wage, a proper position, complete clarity about what the role entails." He paused. "I am aware you have no reason to agree on the basis of one difficult morning. I am asking you to consider it." Nora thought about the house on Casterfield Lane, about the bolt on the door and the Thursday afternoons and the 4 years of careful, practiced silence. The door behind the Duke opened approximately 3 inches. A set of small fingers appeared around the edge. Albert's face appeared at the level of his uncle's elbow, watching her with the focused, patient hope of a child who has made a decision and is waiting to see if the person he made it about proves worth the making. Nora looked at the fingers. She looked at the face. She looked at the Duke, who had the expression of a man who had not planned this moment but was not, she thought, entirely displeased by how it had arrived. "I will stay," she said. She sent a brief message to Dorothea's house that afternoon. 2 sentences, that she was well and had accepted a position. She did not say where. She was not ready for that yet, and years of living with Dorothea had taught her to protect the things that mattered before they could be attacked. Dorothea did not reply. Nora had not expected her to. What she had not expected, what she had made no plan for and packed no trunk in preparation for, was the quality of the weeks that followed at Renmore. She had expected to be useful. She was useful. She had expected to find her footing. She found it. What she had not expected was the way the house gathered itself around her presence, with the quiet relief of a place that had been missing something specific and was now receiving it. The way Albert arrived at his lessons each morning already carrying something he wanted to discuss. The way the household staff, cautiously at first and then with increasing warmth, treated her not as an addition to the staff but as a fixture, someone who had always been going to be here and had simply taken a while to arrive. She had not expected Cassian Vane. The Duke of Renmore was not a man who gave himself away easily. He had the particular reserve of someone who has learned that a title attracts a species of attention that has nothing to do with the person beneath, and who has responded by developing careful habits of enclosure. He was present in the estate's management, thorough, fair, efficient. He was present in Albert's life in the material sense. He was present at dinner with the courtesy of a man who has been raised to inhabit a room well. But there was a door in him somewhere that had been closed for a long time. Nora could see it the way she saw most things, clearly, without being asked to. She did not try to open it. Forcing doors was not something she had ever had patience for. What she did instead was simply be herself, without adjustment or performance, and let that be what it was. She made bread on Sunday mornings in the kitchen with Mrs. Hale because she missed it, and because the oven at Renmore was a proper one and deserved proper use. She read with Albert in the evenings and argued navigational theory with him with complete seriousness, conceding the points he was right about and declining to concede the ones he was wrong about, which he found enormously satisfying in a way he expressed by immediately coming back with a better argument. She walked the grounds in the late afternoon and was, for the first time in 4 years, simply a person existing in a space without calculating what it was costing or what it was going to cost. In November, on an evening when Albert had long been in bed and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, she went to the library to return a book and found the Duke there. He was not reading. He was sitting in the chair by the lamp with the particular stillness of a man who has come to a room to be alone with something, and has been surprised by company. "I did not mean to disturb you," she said. "You haven't," he said. She returned the book to its shelf. She selected another. She was nearly at the door when he said, "Albert told me today that you argued with him for 20 minutes about the curvature of the Earth as it applies to maritime navigation. He was right about the principle," Nora said, "and wrong about the practical application. It seemed worth the distinction." "He said," Cassian continued, with the careful tone of a man reporting something that has stayed with him, "that you were the first person other than his tutors who had argued with him about something rather than agreeing. Agreeing with a child when he is wrong does him no service," Nora said. "It teaches him that being wrong is acceptable so long as you are confident. That is a costly lesson." "Yes," he said, "it is." A pause. "His mother argued with him. He doesn't remember it. The tutor told me she refused to let him win at chess until he had earned it." He looked at the fire. I have found it difficult sometimes to be another source of difficulty for him. He lost so much, so early." Nora looked at him. This was not, she understood, something he had said aloud before. "Difficulty is not the same as hardship," she said. "He needs both, and he needs to know the difference. The first is what sharpens him. The second is what he survived." She paused. "He is remarkably well made for both. You did that." Cassian looked at her with the expression of a man receiving a true thing about himself from an unexpected direction and not yet knowing what to do with it. "With considerable help from people who were better at it than I was," he said. "Most good things," Nora said, "are built with help." She went to bed. She lay awake longer than she intended, thinking about a man sitting alone by a library fire and the specific quality of his voice when he spoke about his son's mother, and how some griefs take up permanent residence in a person and simply become part of the architecture of them. She thought, "I am not going to be sensible about this." Then she thought, "I am going to try very hard to be sensible about this." She was not, in the end, entirely sensible. But she was patient, which was perhaps more useful. December arrived with frost on the grounds and a stillness over the estate that had the particular quality of a held breath. Nora came down before the dawn one morning because the household bread needed an early start, and she had developed over the weeks the habit of preferring to do this herself. The kitchen was quiet, the fire was low. Cassian was sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea. He looked up when she came in. He did not apologize for being there, which she noted. "I'll make fresh," she said, taking the cold cup from in front of him without ceremony. "You don't need to." "I know," she said, and put the kettle on. She made the tea. She set it before him. She sat across from him because it was before dawn, and they were the only two people. Awake in the house and performing the opposite seemed unnecessarily complicated. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she said, because it was 4 in the morning, and she had, over the past weeks, lost her appetite for pretending, "What are you carrying tonight?" He looked at her, a long look that was deciding something. "My brother," he said, finally. "Robert, Albert's father." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "When we were young, before the title, before any of it, we used to be up like this, before the house." He said it was the only honest part of the day. He paused. "I come down here sometimes and it feels I cannot explain it sensibly." "You don't have to explain it sensibly," Nora said. "It doesn't need to be sensible. It needs to be what it is." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has not often been told this. My father died 4 years ago, she said. There are still mornings when I reach for the sound of his voice and find only my own, and the distance between those two things has not grown smaller. I think it doesn't shrink. I think we simply become more competent at living alongside it. Albert said something similar, Cassian said after a moment. Last week, he said he thought grief was like the weather. You couldn't make it stop, but you could learn to know when it was coming and dress accordingly. A pause. He said you told him something about patience, something about bread. Something shifted in Nora's chest. He applied it to grief. He applies it to a remarkable number of things, Cassian said. And this time the shadow at the corner of his expression became something actual, brief and real and entirely unguarded. It was the first time she had seen him smile. She understood, looking at it, that it did not come easily, and that he did not give it away, and that the fact that it had arrived in this kitchen at 4 in the morning over cold tea made it more valuable than any smile she had seen in a drawing room in her life. He is remarkable, she said. Yes, Cassian said. He looked at her across the table. The pre-dawn light was grey and unsparing, and he sat in it without arrangement, which was, she was beginning to understand how he looked when he was not managing anything. So are you, Miss Ellsworth. I have found, over these weeks, that this house is not what it was before you came into it. And I am aware that is a great deal to say to someone who came to make bread on a Sunday morning, but it is 4 o'clock, and I am told this is the honest part of the day. Nora looked at him. The fire crackled. The kettle had gone quiet. Tell me about your brother, she said. What he was like when you were young, before the regiment. Cassian looked at her for another moment. Then he settled back in his chair, and the thing he had been carrying since he sat down seemed to lighten slightly, the way things lighten when someone has agreed to help carry them, and he began to talk. She listened. The bread dough rose on the board, the kitchen filled with warmth. The dark became grey, became the first cold light of a December morning, and neither of them marked the time, or the hour, or noticed when the honest part of the day became the ordinary one. This was how it began, not in a garden, not with a declaration. In a kitchen at 4 in the morning, with cold tea made warm again, and a man finally allowed to say the name of someone he missed. The weeks between December and February had a different quality than the weeks before them. Nothing was announced. Nothing was declared. The door that had been closed in him simply opened. Gradually, the way doors open when no one is forcing them. One morning a little further, one evening a little more, until the question of whether it was open was no longer a question at all. He left books on the library table that he knew she had not yet read. She left bread in the kitchen at times she knew he would pass through it. They argued about the management of the South grounds with the mutual respect of two people who are both right about different parts of the same problem. They sat on opposite sides of the library fire on evenings when Albert had retired and the house was quiet, and the silence between them was of the kind that does not need filling, because it is itself a form of communication. Albert observed all of this with the focused attention of a naturalist, documenting a phenomenon he predicted but did not wish to disturb by acknowledging. He said nothing. He reorganized the library shelves once a week with a system that changed slightly each time and which he defended, on each occasion, with complete conviction. He won at chess twice and was defeated by Nora 4 times, and the defeats were, she suspected, his favorite part. One afternoon in late January, walking the grounds in the flat gold light, Albert fell into step beside her without announcement and walked in silence for a while, which was unusual enough that she looked at him. I think, he said without looking up from the path, that you make my uncle better, not different, better, like bread when it has proved correctly. He paused. I thought you should know that I notice. Nora looked at the grounds ahead of them. Thank you, Albert, she said. You are welcome, he said with great seriousness, and increased his pace slightly to indicate the subject was closed. Cassian asked her in the garden in February. The frost was on the ground, and his breath was visible in the cold air, and there was no theatre to it. No prepared speech, no arranged moment. They had simply walked out after breakfast because the morning was clear after a week of grey, and they had been walking for 20 minutes in the comfortable companionship of two people who no longer needed conversation to fill the space between them, and he stopped on the path and looked at her and said, I have been solitary for a long time. Not lonely. I told myself they were the same, and they are not. I was lonely, and I had convinced myself that was simply my permanent character. He looked at her steadily, the way he looked at everything he considered important, fully, without decoration. I find I was wrong. I find that what I would most like is the right to keep having these mornings, all of them. For a considerable time, he paused. I am asking, Nora, not assuming. She looked at him. She thought about her father, who showed love through presence rather than declaration, and had taught her, without meaning to, that the most important things were said simply and meant completely. She thought about a Wednesday in October and a door thrown shut, and a boy in the rain and the woman who went out the back, and how none of it had been the life she expected, and all of it had become the life she had. Yes, she said. She meant it with everything she had. Albert served as witness at the register with an air of immense personal satisfaction, the satisfaction of a naturalist whose hypothesis has been confirmed by the data. He wore his best coat. He carried his father's button in his pocket, as he had every day since March, and would every day for the rest of his life. Nora pressed her name to the page and thought about 4 years of careful silence and what they had cost and what they had built in her without her knowing, the patience, the noticing, the understanding that love was mostly a question of who you showed up for and how many times. She thought about yes, about how she had understood it, for most of her life, as a practical word, a word of duty and survival. She had not known it could also be the word that opens the door to everything. Albert Vane grew up with the button and the library, and 2 people in his corner who noticed what he needed before he could articulate it, which is the finest inheritance any child can receive, and the only one that cannot be managed by lawyers or diminished by time. He was bookish and precise and occasionally magnificent in his certainty, and he won at chess before he was 12 and spent the next decade being beaten by Nora, who had decided he had earned the difficulty and delivered it without apology or softening. He loved her for this in the Vane fashion, through loyalty and presence rather than declaration, and she understood it completely because she had always understood how that particular language worked. He grew into exactly what Robert Vane had predicted he would become. How Robert had known this from looking at a small boy of 3 is the kind of mystery that fathers sometimes carry, and that the rest of us can only observe from the outside and call it love. Cassian learned, over the years, to leave open the doors that he had kept shut for a long time. This was not quick, it was not comfortable. It was, however, thorough, in the manner of a man doing something that mattered enough to do properly. And Nora was, among the many things she was, very patient with the things that mattered. The kitchen at 4 in the morning became, over the years, their particular place. Not every morning, not even most mornings, but the mornings that needed it, the ones carrying grief or difficulty or simply the weight of things that required the honest part of the day. Those mornings they met in the kitchen and made tea and sat across from each other in the grey pre-dawn light, and this was, as Robert Vane had once said to his brother about such things, sufficient. Dorothea Price learned of the engagement the way the rest of Lincolnshire learned of it, through the efficient channels available to a county, presented with the most interesting domestic development in several seasons. She learned, at the same time, that the household she had been managing on the back of Nora's labour was somewhat less stable without that labour in it, which was information she received with the discomfort of a woman who had believed herself to be the engine of something and has discovered she was the passenger. She came to the gates of Renmore in the spring. She arrived without the second-best dress and without the prepared speech, and she asked not for the Duke but for Nora. Nora came to the gate herself. Dorothea had aged in the month since October. Not dramatically, in the way of a woman who has been living in the consequence of a decision she made in under 2 minutes, and has been doing the arithmetic on it ever since. I have come, she said, with the careful dignity of someone who has rehearsed this and found, now that the moment is here, that the rehearsed version and the real one are not quite the same, to ask your pardon. Nora looked at her for a long moment. She thought about her father's hands, about February and the garden lie and the 4 years of careful silence and the Thursday afternoons and the midsummer ball. She thought about what all of it had cost and what it had made of her, and whether the making would have happened without the cost, and she could not answer that question with any certainty, which was perhaps its own kind of answer. She thought about Albert saying, I would rather, they said, I am sorry. He was important and now he is gone and that is a true loss. That would be honest. You have it, Nora said. My pardon, freely and without conditions. Dorothea looked at her. I give it, Nora said, not because the past has been resolved to my satisfaction, but because my father would have given it, and because carrying grievance is a weight I have no interest in carrying, and because I find I would like to be the kind of person who can. She went inside and she returned with a cloth package, a length of good green wool, fine quality. a jar of preserved plums from the Renmore kitchen garden, and a modest sum of money. Enough to be genuinely useful and not so much as to be humiliating. She held it out. Dorothea took it with the hands of a woman who had come prepared for a scene and had received instead something she did not have the categories for. Something that required more of her in the receiving than anger would have. "Go home, Dorothea," Nora said, quietly, without cruelty, with the clean finality of a door being closed gently rather than slammed. "Live well. The next time a child knocks on your door in the rain, open it." She stepped back. "This gate will not open for you again. Not because I wish you harm. Because we are done, and done things should be allowed to be done." The gate closed. Nora stood inside it for a moment. She looked at the grounds and the house, and the yellow square of Albert's window, and the smoke from the kitchen where Mrs. Hale was starting the morning bread. She thought about a Wednesday in October, about a boy in the rain and the woman who went out the back and the 4 miles in the dark and the grip of small hands on a brass button, and the particular quality of a child's voice when he says thank you and means it as a complete and serious thing. She thought about how none of it had been the life she expected. She thought about how entirely it was the life she would have chosen, if choosing had been how such things worked. Some things begin with a door being closed. The story is what happens because someone goes out the back. She turned and walked home up the drive, and the gate was closed behind her, and the morning was clear and cold and entirely, simply hers. We've come to the end of today's story. Wherever you are, we hope you are well. We love every one of you, more than a short outro can say. Thank you for being here, and please kindly support us by sharing our stories. It means so much and helps our channel grow. Love you once again.